Hi everybody, Captain Al speaking with your training tips designed to help make you a better, more knowledgeable flight simmer, pilot, or aviation enthusiast. Let's lower the HUD and see what is on the horizon for today. Today our briefing will cover the continuation of our line flight from Seattle, Tacoma, Ksea to Anchorage, Alaska, Papa Alpha November Charlie. This is part 2 in the Boeing 747-8. Let's go over to the virtual simulator. We're back in the virtual simulator for part 2 of line flight from Seattle to Anchorage. And we left off with the CDU pre-flight. One thing we didn't do and we can do is load the winds that we got from our company from the data link. And to do that, I went to the legs page, and then from the legs page down here at 6 right is route data, and then we can either enter these manually or we can have them data linked in the form of an uplink to us. And of course, if you didn't have that capability, you'd have to enter these manually, and that's a long process. So you would enter the first few, and then once you get airborne, you would have a lot of time, especially on a long flight, to enter the rest. And that's the way it used to have to be done. But now, with more modern methods, we can, with a push of a button, just request the winds, and they can be uplinked to us, and they've already been uplinked to us. And we have a load prompt here at 6 right. When I push that, that'll go ahead and load the winds, and then we can see that in the scratch pad it says descent forecast uplink is ready. So we'll go ahead and execute that, and then if we want to, we can go to the VNAV page. We're on the climb page. We know the descent page is page 3, so if we go to page 3 and then go to forecast, then you'll have the load and purge prompt there, because this uplink is ready now to load the descent winds into Anchorage. So we'll load that, and you can see that that's all filled in with our descent winds into Anchorage. So what this does for us is it refines the ETA and fuel remaining along our route to Anchorage, because the IRSs can only tell us what the winds are at our present position, and they interpolate those winds out to a certain distance, like around 200 to 300 miles. But beyond that, the FMC has no idea what the winds are. And if you're going on a long flight, the winds are going to change quite substantially. So by us giving the computer that information on winds, it will go ahead then and more accurately refine our ETA and our fuel remaining to destination. So you notice if we go to the route data page, we've got a bunch of W's here, and that would indicate that these are all pilot entered winds. It goes up to, looks like it goes up to Ann, so it gives us enough winds to get started. If we needed to, then we could put in the rest of these winds, because we still do have quite a few pages here of winds. And at Ann, let's see, at Ann, we would still have, looks like 59, 85, 130 miles. We'd probably want to still put in some winds on some of these waypoints, so it didn't give us all the winds, but it certainly gave us enough to get started. And then we can go to our flight plan and put in the rest of these if we choose to, at least up to the point where we're going to start our descent. And then, of course, on the VNAV page, we have our forecast winds for the descent. And they were put in automatically, so this has an effect on the top of descent point. So it'll move the top of descent point back or forward based on these descent forecast winds. So we certainly have enough to get started on winds up to Ann. And then we go in the flight plan and get the rest. Okay, so with that, we'll do the first officer's flight deck preparation. So we'll check that the EECs are normal, the alternate lights are extinguished, the IRUs are in nav, standby power is in auto, utility buses are on, the off lights are extinguished, the APU started. We've got APU generator 1. We'll say they're done with loading now, so we'll put on APU generator 2. Bus tie switches are in auto, the isolation lights are extinguished. Generator control switches are on, the off lights are illuminated. Drive disconnect switch, the guards are closed, they're safety wired, and the drive lights are illuminated. System fault lights are illuminated, demand pump pressure lights illuminated, demand pumps are all off, engine driven pumps are on, the pressure lights are illuminated. Again, you can notice from generator control down there's all lights. From the bus ties up there's no lights except for what you have on for external or APU. And that's a good just a general check to see that all the lights are proper. Storm we don't need, just the circuit breaker overhead, glare shield, dome. Let's come up here. We don't have to do a fire overheat test, that's maintenance. We'll push the guard in, that'll bring the switch to armed. The captain audio system's normal, the observer audio system normal. Interphone's off, field transfer, guard closed, it's blank. Push the fire switches in. Of course, we can't do that in a virtual simulator, but just make sure they're in. No lights here, APU fire switch in, no light. Cockpit area microphone. These switches should be off and blank indications, guard closed, blank indications. Start switches all in, we just push to make sure. And fuel jettison is off. Nozzle valve switches are guards closed, no lights. Fuel panel, we're going to make sure all the cross feeds are open, so we'll open 1 and 4. All the fuel pump switches will be off. Pressure lights in main tanks 1, 2, 3, and 4. No pressure lights in the overrides in the center tank. And if the APU is running, no pressure light in tank 2 and 3 aft, since the APU is using that pump. Engine anti-ice is auto, wing anti-ice is auto, windshield wiper switches are off, turn on the window heat. That should get rid of those status messages. Washer fluid, spring loaded to the off position. Lights as desired, landing lights off, runway turnoffs off, taxi lights off. Fuel transfer 1 and 4 guard closed, ram air turbine guard closed, no lights, center air data computer normal. Supernumerary is guarded closed, that puts it in the normal position. The yaw damper switch is on, the off lights are extinguished. Landing altitude, we could check that if we wanted to. We could, if we push that on. And then we go down to our primary ICAS, you'll see that the landing altitude is displayed in manual because we've taken it out of the auto position. And then if we go back upstairs and push it again, it'll bring it back to auto. And right now it's set to Seattle field elevation. No need to check that if you don't want to, but you could if you wanted to. Outflow valves are open, the automatic system is on, the switches are out, and the lights are out. And so the manual system is standing by, but it's in auto. This is spring loaded to the middle position, not open, not closed, but in the middle. And auto select switch is in norm. Fan is desired on the ground if you needed it for the freighter. These switches as desired. Alternate ventilation, guard closed. Equipment cooling is normal. High flow switch is off. Trim air switches are on. Packs, since we have the APU running, we could turn the packs on. We check that the pack reset switch is it's a momentary switch, so it's out with no light indication. And the isolation valve, left and right are open. The APU switch is on, no light, and the engine bleeds are on with the off lights illuminated. Beacon off. Nav lights normally would stay on. PMDG always turns it off, but normally they'd stay on, so we'll turn it on. Strobe off, wing off, logo as desired. Indicator light test, if you wanted to do a test, you could, and that'll illuminate all your light indications, and you could do a check all the way around. It's not necessary to do that, but if you wanted to, you could. Then from there, we'll come down to the, since we're doing the first officers, the flight director on, as desired here. EFIS control panel, we could go to VOR, or we go to ADF and VOR just to make sure that ADF's blue, it's working, and VOR is green, it's working. And then you could go to VOR for both when you're done with that. And we want the technique, but you maybe want the airport switch on for display airports after you take off. And then the radio baro would be negative, so it's not displayed. And then we'll set our altimeter setting, and the ATIS that we got from Seattle, the ATIS is 2980 on the altimeter, so we'll set that. .2980 is Seattle altimeter. Not quite showing field elevation, but that's kind of normal here at Seattle because it's got some rolling terrain. When you're at the gate, it does show below the field elevation. Most airports are up here. It's a little below in Seattle. And we've got what else can we check up here? Flight path vectors desired, meters. We're in the States, we don't need meters. Range as desired. So we can turn our range to whatever we want. And the traffic, we're going to want the TCAS off displayed. We can go down and see if the TCAS is on now. And it probably is, so we don't want that on. I'm going to go to standby, and then we should see TCAS off displayed. As long as the IRUs are in nav, which they are already, then this TCAS off will be displayed. If it's not, you'd want to push the traffic switch and see that that's on. You want that displayed. And if you wanted to, you could check that the VSD works. It does. The vertical situation display, and then that's good for the EFIS control panel. And then you come down to your sidewall here, and we could check our, if we can move over a little bit, we could check our oxygen panel. And to check that, a little bit more difficult in the virtual simulator, but you can kind of do it. Boeing procedure is not to check the oxygen mask microphone, but some airlines do that. So if you were going to do that, you go to flight, which is right here. You go to speaker. We'd want the status page displayed. So we'll bring up the secondary ICAS, move it over a little bit, and we'll push status. And then we can go to our down here, and then we'll move over a little bit so we can see the oxygen panel. So you can see it's a little tedious to do. So now we've got enough to do it. We've got the audio panel here, we've got the status page, and we've got the oxygen. So normal 100% switch should be pushed to 100%. I don't think you can move this switch at all. Yeah, they made it so you can't actually manipulate this, but it's in 100%. To check the oxygen crew pressure, we've got it set up for the oxygen check. And then what you're going to do normally is you're going to hold down the reset test lever. You'll see the yellow cross indicating oxygen flow momentarily. There it is. But then when you do that, when you click that, you're also going to push the emergency switch at the same time and then hold that, and you'll see continuous oxygen flow. And then you're going to check the status page to see that the oxygen pressure doesn't drop more than 100 psi. So you'd hold the reset test lever down, at the same time go to the emergency switch and push that. So I'll do that kind of quickly here. Push it down, go over here, push, and now you'll see it's continuous. And you can even, I can hear it vaguely. You know, I don't have the sound way turned up, but I can hear it. And I hold that for 10 seconds. And then I check the oxygen crew pressure doesn't drop by more than 100 psi. Now at the same time, if you're going to do an oxygen check, which we can't really do because I don't have two mice to do this, you'd have to come over here and hold the, go to the RT position. You're in flight, you're in speaker, and then when you go to RT, you'll hear the sound of oxygen across the oxygen mask microphone and through the speaker. And so you hear the hiss. If you're going to do that, but it's virtually, I don't know how you do it. You don't have enough hands to do it in the virtual simulator. But the Boeing procedure is just to do this, just to push that down, push that. It's continuous, hold it for 10 seconds, and make sure you don't get a drop here by more than 100 psi. And that's the oxygen check. Then from there we can come over to our foot and shoulder heaters, you know, would be as desired on the ground. And then you can go to your instrument source select switches, which will be over here. And you can check that they're all 12 o'clock. We check this sidewall panel. Again, if you want to do a really proper cockpit setup, then you could come over here and check these as desired. You know, if it's night, you'd turn these up. It's not, so we don't have to fool around with these. But we'd turn them up if it was night. And we probably already adjusted these before we did the cockpit setup. Here's our push to talk switch. There's our start the chronograph. There's our data link switches for CPDLC for terms of ATC. Calling us with the CPDLC messages. And then we could come over and from there, we're going to go to the PFD. We're checking blank, toga, FD, 8 degrees pitch up, wings level, 30 knots, parked, ground speed 0. The no flags, heading's good. We got the altimeter set right now. And general status, you're looking for mainly no flags. MFD, inboard display is on MFD, and then the ND, ground speed 0, no flags, as desired with the VOR ADF switches. TCAS off displayed, your routes displayed, it's active in magenta, you know, again, range is desired, things like that. We'll come over here and check the ICAS. Brightness display is desired. EIU auto selector and auto. Heading reference switch in normal, FMC in left. Alternate flaps are off. Alternate flap arm switch is off. Alternate gear extend switch is guard closed. No indications. Landing gear levers down, and the auto brakes, we can go to RTO. We'll check the ICAS then. We could go back to engine, which is right there. And we could check our ICAS. And the one thing we're checking for here is that all the messages are normal. And you can see we've got hydraulic pressure system 1 and 4, system 2 and 3, that's all normal. Brake source, shutdown messages, doors are open, the TCAS off, that's all normal stuff. These fuel messages are normal because the fuel pumps are off. Tank to engine because we're tank to engine, that's fine. And then cancel. Want to get rid of them and keep a clear screen. So we're checking for something that's not normal here. These are all normal messages. And then we check our display to make sure everything's here, nothing's missing. The display units and the interface to them, the EIU, the EFIS ICAS interface unit is all operating. So we check all the displays. We can check our indications here again if we want. Total fuel on board. And you've got TAT right here, and this is the fuel temperature in tank 1. And then we can go to our secondary ICAS and check N2, fuel flow, oil pressure, temperature, quantity, vibration. This is usually where we now do the checklist check. So we could go up here, we could select checklist, and this is where we'll go to reset the checklist to make sure that it's where we want it for the start of our flight. So we'll go to resets, and then we come down here, check the database is current. Again, can't really check it in the virtual simulator, there's only one. But we would check that the revision is current, the date is current, and then we're going to go to reset all and push. And that's all we need to do there, and then stow the checklist. And when you come back to it, it's going to come up with a pre-flight checklist, which is the checklist that we want. And then from here we come down to the CDU, and if I'm the first officer, then I'm going to basically check if the captain was the person to do the CDU pre-flight. Let's say he's the pilot flying, so maybe he did the CDU pre-flight, then I'm going to check it. If I'm the guy that did it, then the captain's going to check it. So again, I'll go to FMC and check my models, engines, and I'll go through the whole sequence again. Position initialization page, check there. Route page, check the route. I'll go over it with a flight plan. And if the first officer were the one to do the courses and distances, then if I'm the captain, I don't need to recheck that. All I need to do is check to make sure the route's in there and it agrees with the flight plan. And I'd probably go to progress and check that the distance to Anchorage matches the flight plan, it's reasonable. And he's checked, the other guy has checked the specific courses and distances. So again, both crew members don't need to do that, just one. And then from there I could go to the Perfinit page and check that this is all good. And then I go to the thrust limit page, check that thrust is desired, and then I go to the takeoff page and check what's in here, page 2, and then back to page 1. Check what's in here and make sure everything is good there. So I agree with what the captain put in, let's say. And then from there I can come down to the audio panel, the lower panel. And I'll check the captain's radio tuning panel, that it's, again, whatever frequencies I want in here right now I could put. Normally the left radio tuning panel will be used for ground and tower and departure and center and things like that, and the right radio tuning panel will be used for ATIS and clearances and company and things like that, and then the center will be used primarily for the data link system, which it's on right now. So we'll make sure the radio's on, frequencies as desired. We can start to set them up. We're not going to do that. And then the audio control panel as desired. I've got the left VHF, I've got the speaker on if I needed it, and as desired. Check the center, it's on, data. Observers as desired. Seatbelt sign, I'll turn that on. Radar panel, weather radar, make sure it's in weather turbulence, and left or right radio. The left I think is, the right is pushed down and the left is up, pushed out. Gyno, we'll leave it on left. And rudder trim 0, aileron trim 0, we can check the control column for that. Rudder trim center is, it's a momentary action switch, it's out. No lights. No lights here. Again, right radio tuning panel can be tuned to ATIS or whatever we need. And then my audio panel, I can go to the left or whatever I want to do. If I'm going to get the clearance, maybe I go to right. Speaker, whatever. Transponder, we'll go to 2000, which is VFR. Once we get the clearance, then we'll put that in, make sure this is on standby, and we're on left transponder, that's fine. And we're on N for the normal range of altitudes, what it's looking for in terms of the TCAS system. And then we'll adjust our seat and adjust our rudder pedals, and that's kind of it for the FO. For the captain, he'll come across here, start with his EFIS control panel. He'll do the same thing. Go to ADF or VOR, or one of each to at least check it. ADF, VOR, and then at some point he'll go to VOR, maybe when taxiing out or whatever, but to check it, he might just go ADF, VOR. That's technique. You can do that any way you want to. Barrow, we make sure there's nothing in the barrow, none of the radio or barrow set. It's not displayed on the PFD. Flight path vector is desired. Meters we don't need. We're in the map mode. Range as desired. We'll bring the range up. Oops, wrong switch there. Bring the range up a little bit. And we'll go to airport, just because that's a good one to have on. Then we do the MCP, flight director on, auto throttle arm. The heading select indicators in auto, and the disengage bar is flush and not pulled down. And then we stop right there because it's the FO did over here. We stop right there. We can then come down to our side panel, and we can do the oxygen check just like the FO did down here. And then we can check our foot and shoulder heaters, and then come up on the instrument source selects, which is all 12 o'clock. Come here, blank Toga Toga FD, 8 degrees pitch up, wings level, 30 knots park, ground speed 0, 200 knots, that's what we got the MCP, 10,000 feet, what we have in the MCP. No flags, heading's good, 2980 set to altimeter. Again, it shows a little below what the field elevation actually would be. That's kind of normal in Seattle. MFD selected here, ground speed 0. Range is desired, no flags again. VOR ADF is desired. TCAS off displayed, so that's all good. Just check that ND. Accumulator, check that. It's down to pre-charge. We could, if we wanted, go up to the hydraulic panel, go to aux. That'll pressurize the accumulator. You don't have to get ground clearance to do that. You're not pressurizing the whole hydraulic system, just the aux pump, which will go to the brakes, and set that. So if you ever need to pump it up, if you do that, the light goes out, the brake source light goes out when you're doing that. And we'll pump up the accumulator, and then we'll go back to off on the selector. And then the brake source light will come back on because there's no active brake source once you turn that off. The accumulator, of course, will hold the pressure and to the brakes at that point. So it's 3,000 psi. So if we go upstairs, turn that off, and then we'll come back down, and you'll notice that this light will come on in a second, and it should be illuminated during the pre-flight. And then we come over here to the ISFD, check that. Brightness is desired, 30 knots parked. It's set to the 2980 field elevation. No flags again, and usually we don't have the approach selected or anything like that. That should also be blank, and so that's good. Check that. Set the altimeter if you need to. I have it set so that when I set the altimeter, it sets all three instead of having to do it individually. And then from there, we come down to the CDU. I've already done that as the captain, so I want to be on the takeoff reference page, so I'll go ahead and select that. He's going to be in the legs page for takeoff, so we'll select that. Come down to the quadrant, thrust quadrant, and again make sure the speed brake lever is down. Reversers are forward, the thrust levers are aft, and the flaps are up. This is centered. Guards are closed, which is auto. Fuel control switches are cut off, and we'd set the parking brake at this time. And then I'll come down to the lower panel and check my audio control panel as desired. And then if I wanted to, I could check rudder and aileron tremor 0. That's something I would probably do. And then adjust my seat and adjust my rudder pedals. And then we're done with the cockpit setup at that time. Then we get the ATIS, and we get the clearance. So we'll say the ATIS, I'll look at it on my active sky. Let's see, I could probably bring that down here if we want to. So we'll get the ATIS, and we'll look at the weather for Seattle. Let's see, where are you, Seattle? There we are. So right now we've got 0403 knots, 10 statute miles, broken at 7,000, overcast at 10,000, temperature 14, dew point 10, altimeter 2978 now. And you can see there's my airplane position, and there's how we're departing out to the northwest going to Anchorage. We'll bring that back up. 2978 on the altimeter. Brake source, you know what that is. We'll keep that clear again. So we got the ATIS, and then we pick up our clearance, and we'll say we've got our clearance, and let's say we're cleared to 2000 on departure, and we're cleared via the Bangor 9 departure. Flight plan route to maintain 2000. Expect flight level 340 10 minutes after departure. Departure will be 119 or decimal 2, and they say squawk 4223. So we'll come down and squawk 4223. We've got our clearance 4223. And now we can, as long as we have the final papers on board, we've got the ATIS, we've got the clearance, we can set our MCP at this time. So we'll do that. There's usually 4 or 5 things we need to set here. We'll set our V2 speed, which is going to be 174. And we'll set our initial heading of runway heading, which will be 160, I think it's 164. It's Seattle. 164 is good. And our altitude is going to be 2000, so we'll set that. And then we'll arm VNAV, and we'll arm LNAV because we have a SID departure. If we didn't have a SID departure, we would not arm LNAV, but we do have a SID departure, so we'll arm LNAV. So it's 5 things in this case. V2 set, LNAV, VNAV, initial heading, initial altitude, those 5 things. Once the MCP is set, then we can do a crew briefing. And let's bring down our chart for that. Okay, so we do a short crew briefing. The crew briefing will be something like this. This will be a left seat takeoff. Departing runway 16 left, taxiing out. We'll be pushed out of Sierra 10 into the alley, and then ramp will clear us probably up to box 88. We'll contact ground, and looks like we'll probably go straight out right on Bravo. Taxi to 16 left, no hot spots. On the departure, we're going to be flying the Bangor 9 departure. Today it's going to be TO1 thrust, flap 10 takeoff. From runway 16 left, we'll climb heading 164 to at or above 932, then direct COVIB on track 166 to cross Renby at or above 3000, and on depicted route to Bangor, cross Bangor at or above 10,000. That's in the FMC. I've checked that. Altitudes assigned by ATC, we have 12,000. Require RNAV 1 for the departure. We'll check that on the map before we go to make sure we have RNAV 1. And from Bangor, it's going to be on the transition. Our transition is the RE transition. And then expect filed flight level 50 nautical miles from Seattle VOR. The high terrain is to the west. Looking at the chart, we've got 16 left. We'll be coming out this way to Cava, Brenby at or above 3, Richer, Tomry, and then Bangor at or above 10, and then via the RE transition out. Anything up to 80 knots, call it out. We'll reject for anything up to 80. Above 80, we get into the high-speed regime. We're only going to reject for engine fire, engine failure, any fire, predictive wind shear, or unsafe aircraft. It's going to be a crew concept, so you keep an eye on me, I'll keep an eye on you. If there's something you don't like, speak up. We'll discuss it and agree on an appropriate course of action, but don't be afraid to speak up. The supernumeraries have been briefed. Any questions? No questions? Okay. Pre-flight checklist. And now that we've done the briefing, now we're pretty much ready to go. The pre-flight check can come actually right after you do your cockpit setup. So right after that, you call for the pre-flight check. You could delay it until the briefing. It'd kind of be up to you. But procedurally, we normally do it right after you get set up. So let's do that now. And bring up checklist. And the first officer, the captain would call for the pre-flight check. First officer brings it up and says oxygen. I'd say test at 100%, then he'd say test at 100%. And then we check it off. Flight instruments, heading 153, altimeter 29 or 78 inches. He'd say heading 153, altimeter 29 or 78 inches. We're checking the heading in 5 places. We're checking it here, we're checking it here, we're checking the mag compass, we're checking it here, we're checking it here. So 5 different places we're checking it, but we're only saying it once. Check that off, and pre-flight checklist complete. Then we stow the checklist. And then we get the ATIS, get the clearance, set up the clearance, and then brief. And now we're pretty much ready, so we'll check the doors. Okay, and then we're ready to close the doors, so we'll go to the menu. It's FS Actions. Then we'll go to the doors, and we'll close the cargo doors now. Now you notice you have to be careful here. If you had put on external 2, let's see, because we had put it on. So let's say I'll put it back on here. If you would put that on and you try to close the doors, you'll notice they don't close. And that's because you've disabled the main deck handling bus. So if you'd probably want to wait till the doors are closed before you actually push that on. So when cargo is complete and they close the doors, then go ahead and push that on. But just make it avail for now. Now you can see we can close the doors now. They will close. So we'll close the nose and the cargo, and the let's see, the lower lobes are already closed. And if we go outside, we can see that they are closing. And let's go around to the other side and just make sure the lower lobes are closed. The forward and aft cargo doors are closed. And then once those doors are closed, we can put the external 2 back on. And you can see now that they are closed. And now we can go ahead and put external 2 on with no problem. And we can check things like that the doors are closed. So we'll go to the door synoptic, and you can see here that everything is closed up now. And then we check with them downstairs how they're doing. And if external power were connected, we'd have them disconnect external power if it wasn't, if they hadn't called us first. And then once we've done that, we can go ahead and get a pushback clearance. And we'd request from Seattle Ground, Qatar 44 Heavy, push and start out of Sierra 10. They'd say 44 Heavy cleared to push and start out of Sierra 10, tail in the alley. Then we go ahead and do the before start procedure, followed by the before start checklist. So the before start procedure will start with the first officer coming up, making sure APU 2 is on, because again, if that's not on, you're going to get some load shedding of fuel pumps and things like that. So we want to make sure we have that second power source on. Then we'll bring number 4 to aux, number 1 to aux, number 2 to auto, number 3 to auto. Turn on all the fuel pumps containing usable fuel. We know we don't have anything in the center, so we're not going to turn those on. We'll turn on the beacon. Then we'd come down to the ICAS control panel, and I had to add this because I didn't do this the first time through. So I noticed that I hadn't pushed recall. So when you come down to the ICAS display select panel, you're going to push recall and check the messages. And in the Qatari airplane, you will see the TCAS off, the 4 shutdown messages, and fuel tank to engine. And because we're fuel tank to engine, at that point we'd go up to the fuel panel and we would turn off overrides 2 and 3, and then close cross feeds 1 and 4. Then the tank to engine message will go away. We'll come back down and then push cancel and get rid of all the ICAS messages. Transponder to transponder. And then the captain, the only thing he really does is sets his trim and checks for 00. So he'll set his trim then to 6.3. And you can see it there on the primary ICAS right here as I set it. 6.3. And then I'd also check that the aileron trim is 0 right up here. That says 0, and then I'll check the rudder trim is 0, which it is. And then I could do call for the before start checklist. Once that's complete, we'll bring that up. Just before we do that, amplify that. And then when I call for the before start checklist, the first officer will read the before start checklist. And again, you don't have to read anything that's checked off. So he'll say MCP, then I'll say V2 174, heading 164, altitude 12,000, and he'll check it off. Takeoff speeds, say V1 149, VR 159, V2 174. And he could repeat that. Because he will go also, you got to move things around here. He'll also check that and say the same thing. V1 149, VR 159, V2 174. We're comparing both sides that both FMCs agree with the correct speeds. There's been cases where the FMCs have had different speeds in, so that is a dual response. Takeoff speeds V1, VR, V2. And we'll check that off. CDU preflight completed, that's a dual response. And then trim will be 6.3 units, 0 and 0, responded to by the captain. And then taxi and takeoff briefing completed. And the before start checklist complete. And then we stow the checklist. And then from there we can call the guy on the ground, flight deck to ground, we're ready to push. And then he'll say, okay, your nose gear steering is locked out, and release your parking brake. And then we'll go ahead and release our parking brake and begin push. And then we tell him any specific instructions like tail north or tail in the alley or whatever. And of course, to push, we've got to go to menu, and we've got to go to FSX actions, and we've got to go to pushback. We're going to push back left out of Sierra 10. We'll go 90 degrees. Probably be a little too far. We'll keep it at 265 is fine.
Cockpit to ground. Go ahead. We've been cleared for pushback and start. They want the tail to our left. Roger that. Ready for pushback, tail to the left. Release parking brake, please. Brakes released.
And then he'd say beginning push. He'd tell us that. We'll go back to the legs page here.
Brakes released. Here we go.
Yep, there he goes. He said it. He's just slow. And we'll just make sure we're getting pushed back. And then maybe he says you're on the flight deck. Once you're clear of the jetway, clear to start 3 and 4, hold down 1 and 2 till push complete. And then we'd say, okay, we're starting 3 and 4, and he'd say clear on 3 and 4. And so then we could go up to the FO would come up here, turn 2 or 3 packs off. We'll turn 2 off. And then I'd say start 4 and 3. And then he'd reach up and say starting 4 and 3. And then I'd come down to the fuel control switch and bring 4 and 3 to run. And then we're going to check our secondary, which we'd have up. And we'll see that we have the auto start indication, auto start, idle target indicator, and starting now. Again, for more amplified information on starting, you can view my engine starting videos. This is kind of putting all those videos together in a line flight. Let's go outside to make sure that he is not going to push us back too far. He'll push us back actually as far as you have the feed in there, and it's a little too far probably. And actually this is probably good right here, so I'm going to go ahead and just set the parking brake right here. That'll stop everything.
Pushback complete. Parking brake set.
Brake set.
Steering pin is pulled. Watch for the salute and release from guidance on your right. Have a good flight.
And then you'd probably say, go ahead, you're clear disconnect and show me the pin on the left side, verify the nose gear steering is not locked out. And then you'd say, okay, clear disconnect, your steering is not locked out. We'll show you the pin on the left, and have a good flight so long. Notice when 3 and 4 reach the idle target indicator, went to running, that stays for 30 seconds, then disappears. And then we could say start 2 and 1. We'd get permission from him. He'd say clear on 2 and 1. And then I'd say start 2 and 1, and then the first officer reach up, pull those, and then we can come down to the fuel control switches, the captain, and bring 2 and 1 to run. Should see auto start, idle target indicator, and again our hand would come off the fuel control switches. I'd rest it on my knee because auto start's going to handle all problems in the Dash 8. You'll notice eventually fuel flow will be introduced, and then we'll get light off with the EGT, which you've got already. You can still monitor all this, but we're not going to take action on anything unless we get an ICAS message telling us to. This message is normal right now for when you start the number 4 engine, so we'll cancel that. Keep a clear screen. Again, once these reach the idle target indicator, that's where the engine can sustain itself at idle without any further assistance. It's lit off. It's a controlled explosion, if you will. And we've got running. And then we do the before taxi flow, followed by the before taxi checklist. So the FO would come up here and turn the APU off. Demand pumps 1 to auto, 4 to auto. Engine anti-ice if required. It's not required today. We're not. We don't have visible moisture. We're not at 10 Celsius or below. We come over, turn the packs on. So then we come down and select flaps to. We're using 10 today, so we'll go flap 10. And just prior to that, I probably came up here and turned on the flight controls, and then the captain would do the flight control check. And so he'd go right aileron and check for 2 up, 2 down in the Dash 8, and the spoilers on the right side, and then 2 left, 2 right, proper direction, full movement, and again spoilers on the right, on the left side are displayed, and then 4 down on the elevator, neutral, 4 up on the elevator. Shows, you notice the Dash 8 shows all 4 surfaces instead of just 2. And then on the rudder, we'd be holding the tiller when we do this. Full and correct movement, back to neutral. And then 2 left, again holding the tiller so the nose wheel doesn't move. And back to neutral. So we actually have a nicer representation on the dash 8 of the flight control system. You can also see again that when we're at takeoff flaps, the flaps are drooping. That improves performance and reduces noise in the dash 8. And then we can go ahead and blank that and go flight controls again. Blank it out. And then we could do our before taxi checklist. The captain would call for the before taxi checklist, and then he would say anti-ice, and I'd respond auto. And then he'd say, first I would say recall, and I'd say checked, which has been checked already. Flight controls checked, ground equipment clear, that's a dual response, and before taxi checklist complete. And then we stow the checklist. So then we would call ramp control, and ramp control would probably say flight 44, taxi up to box 88, and then go ahead and contact ground. So we taxi up to box 88, then we contact ground, and ground control would give us our clearance. Okay, from there this will complete part 2, and with the cockpit set up, and now we're ready to taxi and take off. Thanks for watching.